Hello and welcome to the quiet dark. Settle in, get comfortable, and let my voice be your guide into the shadows. Before we begin, I'd love to know when and where you're listening from. What hour is it for you? And what city or country are you in? It helps me to imagine this web of listeners, all settled in for the night, spread across the globe in different pockets of time. It makes our shared experience feel a little less lonely. If you enjoy these long, dark nights with me, please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. It truly helps our small community grow. Now, let's begin. First story, The Lighthouse Echo. The last tendrils of the shore faded into a hazy smudge behind him, swallowed by the vast, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic. Elias Thorne gripped the cold, salt-encrusted railing of the supply boat, his gaze fixed on the solitary sentinel rising from the churning gray. The lighthouse, known simply as the Gray Watch, stood on a jagged tooth of rock miles from the nearest human habitation, a stark monument to isolation. 6 months. That was the term of his post. 6 months as the lone keeper of an automated beacon. A temporary escape from a life that had grown too cluttered, too loud. He craved the silence, the stark simplicity of a world reduced to rock, sea, and light. He was about to get more than he bargained for. The transfer was swift, the goodbyes brief. The boat's engine thrummed, then faded, leaving Elias utterly alone on the narrow landing, the heavy door of the lighthouse looming before him like the maw of some ancient stone beast. He stepped inside, the air immediately cooler, thicker, carrying the faint tang of brine and old machinery. The silence, initially profound, was quickly replaced by the rhythmic pulse of the structure itself. Above him, the massive lens, a crystalline eye, began its slow, deliberate rotation. Groan whir, groan whir. It was a sound that would become the very heartbeat of his existence, a mechanical sigh echoing through the cylindrical tower. Below, the steady, almost hypnotic hum of the generator provided a constant, low-frequency drone, a deep vibration that resonated through the very rock beneath his feet. And outside, omnipresent, eternal, was the ocean, the relentless, rhythmic crash of waves against the base of the rock, a percussive symphony that never ceased, day or night, calm or storm. His first few weeks were a study in recalibration. Elias, a man accustomed to the hurried pace of city life, found himself slowing, his movements becoming more deliberate, his thoughts unspooling with a newfound spaciousness. He explored his new domain, the compact living quarters, the small, efficient kitchen, the winding spiral staircase that led to the lantern room. His duties were minimal, mostly monitoring the automated systems, logging weather data, and performing routine maintenance. It was a life of profound simplicity, a stark contrast to the complexities he had left behind. Sounds became his companions, the groan of the lens, a constant reminder of his purpose, the hum of the generator, a reassuring sign of power and function, the crash of the waves, a primal lullaby that underscored his solitude. He began to discern subtle variations in their cadence, the deeper growl of the sea during a storm, the sharper crack of a particularly large wave, the faint, high-pitched whine of the lens when a gust of wind caught the tower just so. These were the only voices in his world, and he found a strange comfort in their predictability. Then it began. Insidiously, subtly, like a shadow lengthening imperceptibly at dusk. It was during his evening rounds, as the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky and the lantern began its nightly vigil. He was standing by the large, reinforced window in the living area, watching the waves churn below, listening to their familiar roar. And within that roar, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. He frowned, leaning closer to the glass. The sound was fleeting, a mere ghost of a breath, lost almost immediately in the oceanic din. He shook his head. Auditory pareidolia, he reasoned. The brain, starved of complex stimuli, begins to find patterns where none exist, to interpret random noise as something familiar, something human. He had read about it. It was a common phenomenon in isolated environments. He dismissed it, a logical explanation, neatly tucking the anomaly away. But the whisper returned. A few days later, while he was making coffee, the gentle gurgle of the percolator seemed to merge with something else, a soft, sibilant sigh. He paused, his hand hovering over the mug. Nothing, only the percolator and the distant crash of the waves. He told himself it was the wind, whistling through a loose pane, or the creak of the old structure settling. The gray watch was an ancient place, full of its own peculiar sounds, yet the occurrences grew more frequent, more distinct. It was never loud, never sharp, never truly intrusive. It was always there, just on the edge of perception, woven into the fabric of the lighthouse's natural symphony. It was most noticeable when the waves crashed, a faint, almost musical echo that seemed to rise from the foam, a sound that, if he strained, almost resembled a human voice. Not words, never words, but the shape of a voice, the cadence of a human utterance. He started spending more time by the windows, listening intently. He would close his eyes, trying to isolate the sound, to peel it away from the roar of the sea. He'd hold his breath, his heart thudding against his ribs, convinced he was on the verge of deciphering it. But it always eluded him, dissolving into the background noise the moment he focused too hard, leaving him with only the familiar, monotonous sounds of the lighthouse. The logical explanations began to wear thin. He checked every window, every vent, every pipe. He listened for drafts, for loose panels, for anything that might create such an illusion. Nothing. The lighthouse was solid, well-maintained, its machinery humming with predictable efficiency. There was no source for the faint, echoing whisper. Sleep became less of a refuge. The rhythmic groan of the lens, once a comfort, now seemed to carry the faint, almost mocking cadence of the echo. He would lie awake in the dark, straining his ears, trying to catch it, to pin it down. Sometimes, he thought he heard it just outside his door, a soft, drawn-out sigh that seemed to mirror his own restless breath. He would sit up, heart pounding, convinced he was not alone, only to be met by the cold, empty silence of his small room, broken only by the distant, familiar sounds of the tower. The solitude, once a balm, began to press in on him, heavy and suffocating. He found himself talking aloud more often, narrating his actions, commenting on the weather, simply to hear another human voice, even if it was his own. He'd walk through the rooms, muttering to himself, a low, continuous stream of consciousness. And that's when the true horror began to unfurl its insidious tendrils. The echo, previously a vague, unidentifiable sound, started to mimic him. Not his words, still never words, but the rhythm of his speech, the inflection of his voice. If he spoke a sentence with a questioning lilt, a faint, almost imperceptible rise and fall would ripple through the wash of the waves, a ghostly imitation. If he sighed, a soft, drawn-out exhalation would seem to emanate from the very walls. He tested it. He would stand by the window, deliberately speaking in a low, measured tone, then abruptly raising his voice or dropping it to a whisper. He would pause, waiting. And there it would be, a faint, ethereal mirroring, a spectral reflection of his own vocal patterns, woven into the endless crash of the sea. It was like listening to his own thoughts, echoed back to him by something unseen, something formless, something that resided in the very air around him. A cold dread began to settle deep within his bones. This was no longer pareidolia. This was something else, something that listened, something that learned. He started to avoid speaking aloud. The silence in the lighthouse grew heavier, punctuated only by the mechanical groan and hum, and the ceaseless roar of the ocean. But the echo persisted. Now, it seemed to anticipate him. If he thought a question, a faint, rising lilt would subtly enter the wave sounds. If he felt a wave of despair, a long, drawn-out sigh would seem to emanate from the depths. It was as if his own internal monologue, his unspoken thoughts, were being broadcast, then subtly reflected back to him by the very environment. He began to question his sanity. Was the crushing solitude finally breaking him? Was his mind, starved of human interaction, creating this phantom listener, this spectral mirror of his own consciousness? He paced the narrow rooms, his steps echoing hollowly. He stared at his reflection in the dark windows, seeing a man whose eyes held a growing wildness, a desperate, haunted look. He tried to fight it. He blasted music through a small portable speaker, hopping to drown out the phantom sound. But the echo merely wove itself into the melodies, a faint, dissonant harmony that made the music unbearable. He tried to ignore it, to focus on his duties, to read, to write. But the echo was a constant companion, a silent, knowing presence that seemed to mock his every attempt at normalcy. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of dread. Elias ate little, slept less. His once meticulous logs became sparse, scrawled entries. He found himself staring out at the endless gray sea, his mind a turbulent ocean of its own. He would whisper to himself, "Are you real?" And a faint, almost imperceptible tremor would pass through the air, a phantom affirmation. He would clench his fists. What do you want? And the sound of the waves would seem to deepen, to take on a heavier, more insistent rhythm. One particularly stormy night, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the very foundations of the lighthouse. Rain lashed against the glass, and the waves crashed with a furious, deafening roar. Elias was in the lantern room, watching the beam cut through the swirling mist, a solitary sword of light against the chaos. The groan of the lens was almost swallowed by the tempest, and then, through the cacophony, clear as a bell, though still without words, came the echo. It was louder now, more insistent, a sustained, mournful wail that seemed to rise from the very heart of the storm, a perfect, terrifying mimicry of his own internal scream of despair. It wasn't just mirroring his cadence anymore. It was mirroring his emotion. He stumbled back, pressing his hands against his ears. But the sound was inside him, in his head, vibrating through his very bones. It was the sound of his own terror, amplified, distorted, and thrown back at him by the vast, indifferent emptiness of the sea. He ran down the spiral staircase, his breath ragged, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He locked himself in his living quarters, pulling the heavy curtains shut, as if he could block out the sound, block out the unseen presence that had invaded his solitude. He huddled in a corner, trembling, his mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of storm brewed. The echo was everywhere now, a constant, low thrum that seemed to emanate from every surface, every shadow. It was the sound of his own madness, or something far more ancient, something that had finally found a voice in the lonely depths. He looked around his small, confined space. The walls seemed to press in on him, the air thick with the unseen presence. He was trapped, not by the sea, but by the echo, by the possibility that he was no longer alone, or perhaps that he had never truly been alone at all. As the first faint light of dawn began to pierce the storm clouds, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, Elias found himself standing by the window again. The storm was receding, the waves still powerful, but their fury lessening. The groan of the lens continued its relentless rotation, a mechanical heartbeat in the dawn. He closed his eyes, listening. The echo was there, as always, a faint, ethereal whisper woven into the receding roar of the waves. It was no longer terrifying, merely present. It had become a part of him, or he a part of it. The line between his own thoughts and the external sound had blurred, perhaps irrevocably. He opened his eyes and looked out at the vast, empty ocean, stretching to the horizon, cold and gray and utterly silent, save for the ceaseless, rhythmic crash of its waves. And within that sound, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, mirroring the cadence of his own breath, the slow, steady rhythm of his own fatting sanity. Was it the sea speaking to him, or was it merely the echo of a mind unraveling, broadcasting its own quiet despair into the boundless void? The gray watch continued its vigil, its light sweeping across the water, illuminating nothing but the endless, listening darkness. Second story, the night porter's endless floor. My name is Arthur, and this is my first week as the night porter at the Grand Elysium Hotel. It's a marvel, they say, a testament to modern architecture, all sleek lines, polished chrome and glass. From the outside, it gleams, a towering monolith against the city skyline. Inside, it's a different story. It's a labyrinth. My shift begins at 10, when the last of the day staff trickle out, leaving me to the silent, cavernous spaces. My primary duty is simple: walk every floor, from the executive suites on the top to the service corridors below, ensuring all is secure. Check the fire exits, the utility closets, the linen rooms. A simple task, one might think. But the Grand Elysium is not simple. Each floor is identical. Or, at least, it's supposed to be. The corridors stretch out, long and featureless, carpeted in a deep, muted gray that absorbs all sound. The walls are a stark white, punctuated only by the minimalist, almost invisible doors of the guest rooms. The lighting is always dim, a perpetual twilight that casts long, shifting shadows. And there's the hum, a low, persistent thrum of the ventilation system, a steady, almost hypnotic drone that fills the silence. And of course, the soft, almost reverent ding of the elevator as it glides to a halt. My first few nights were a blur of repetition. Up to the 20th floor, then systematically down, one floor at a time. The routine was strangely soothing. The quiet allowed my thoughts to drift, and the sameness of each level meant I didn't have to think much. Just walk, check, move on. The only variation was the occasional guest, a fleeting shadow emerging from a room, or the distant murmur of a late-night conversation behind a closed door. Most nights, though, it was just me, the hum, and the endless corridors. On the fourth night, something shifted. I was on the fourth floor, making my usual rounds. I remember it distinctly. I had just passed room 412, heading towards the emergency exit at the far end of the hall. I'd walked this stretch 3 times already. It was a standard length, maybe 20 paces from 412 to the exit sign. But that night, it felt longer. I paused, my hand on the cool metal of the fire door. Had I miscounted my steps? Had I been distracted? I shook my head, dismissing it as fatigue. The hours were long, and the quiet could play tricks on the mind. I continued my patrol, making a mental note to pay closer attention. When I reached the end of the corridor, I turned back, walking slowly, deliberately counting. 1, 2, 3, 24, 25. It was longer, by a noticeable margin. A chill, not from the hotel's perfectly regulated air conditioning, traced its way down my spine. I pulled out my small notebook, where I kept meticulous records of my rounds. Floor 4, notes from previous nights. Standard corridor length. I flipped back, then forward. Nothing. No indication of any changes, no renovation work, no reason for a hallway to spontaneously extend itself. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the dim lighting, or perhaps the effect of the monotonous hum. I finished my shift, the image of that subtly stretched corridor lingering in my mind. The 6th night brought a more unsettling discovery. I was on the 7th floor. I remember checking the fire exit near room 708 on my previous rounds. It was there, a red sign, a push bar. Standard. But this night, as I approached the spot where it should have been, there was nothing. Just a seamless, stark white wall. I stopped dead, my flashlight beam sweeping across the smooth surface. No door, no sign, not even a faint outline where it might have been plastered over. It was as if it had never existed. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against the silence of the hotel. I reached out, my fingers pressing against the cool, unyielding wall. Solid, utterly solid. I pulled out my notebook again, my hands trembling slightly. Floor 7, fire exit near 708. Checked, secure. My own handwriting stared back at me, a silent accusation. I walked back to the elevator, then returned, just to be sure. Still a wall. I even tried knocking, a hollow, dull sound echoing in the empty corridor. Panic began to prickle at the edges of my composure. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't imagination. A physical structure, a fire exit, had simply vanished. I considered calling someone, the day manager, security. But what would I say? The hotel is changing itself. They'd think I was mad or drunk. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Perhaps it was a new, unannounced renovation, but a fire exit without warning. It made no sense. I continued my rounds, but my steps were heavier, my gaze more scrutinizing. Every corner, every door seemed to hold a new, silent threat. By the 9th night, the disorientation had begun to set in fully. I was on the 9th floor, heading towards the service area. My route was etched into my memory. Past the ice machine, then the linen room, marked clearly with a small, unassuming plaque. I'd opened that door countless times, revealing a small, brightly lit closet filled with fresh sheets and towels. But this night, when I pushed open the door marked linen, it didn't open into a closet. It opened into another corridor. My flashlight beam cut through the dimness, revealing another stretch of gray carpet, white walls, and identical guest room doors. It was a corridor that shouldn't exist. The hotel plans, which I had studied meticulously during my training, showed no such extension on the 9th floor. It was a dead end, a service area. I stepped inside, my mind reeling. The hum was still there, the same low thrum, but now it felt less like a background noise and more like a presence, a living breath. I walked down this impossible hallway, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. There were no room numbers, just blank doors. At the very end, another door, unmarked. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking uncontrollably. It was locked. I backed away slowly, my eyes wide, scanning the impossible space. This wasn't just a vanishing door or a stretching hallway. This was an entirely new, fabricated section of the hotel, appearing out of nowhere. I stumbled back through the linen door, closing it behind me with a soft click. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to find the real linen room. I walked the 9th floor again, meticulously, desperately. It was gone. The door I had just come through was the only one marked linen, and it led to that impossible corridor. The next few nights became a waking nightmare. The changes accelerated, became more brazen. On the 12th floor, a section of wall near the elevators began to ripple, as if the plaster was breathing. On the 3rd floor, a guest room door, 305, simply wasn't there one night, replaced by a smooth, unblemished wall. The next night, it was back, as if nothing had happened. I started leaving small markers. A piece of tape on a door frame, a small scratch on the baseboard. But the next night, they would be gone, or the section of the wall where I'd left them would have shifted, rendering my markers useless. It was as if the hotel was actively erasing my attempts to track its insidious transformation. I tried to talk to the morning staff. "Did you notice anything different on the 7th floor?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "The fire exit near 708. They'd look at me blankly. "It's always been there, Arthur. You must be tired." Or, "No, everything's fine, mate. Long night." Their dismissive responses only deepened my isolation. I was the only one seeing it, the only one trapped in this quiet, architectural madness. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. When I did sleep, the hotel invaded my dreams, its endless corridors stretching into infinity, its silent doors opening into nothingness. I would wake in a cold sweat, the low hum of the ventilation still echoing in my ears. Even in my small, rented room outside the hotel, my voice, even to myself, began to sound tired, hoarse. Each night, as I stepped into the gleaming lobby, it felt less like entering a building, and more like entering a living, breathing entity that was slowly, silently consuming me. The air felt heavier, the silence more profound. I started to get lost. Not just disoriented, but truly lost. One night, I swore I had walked from the 5th floor to the 6th, but the elevator display still read 5. I pressed the button again, and again, the soft ding mocking me. When the doors finally opened, I was still on the 5th floor, but the corridor was completely different, narrower, with different room numbers. The hotel was gaslighting me. It was rewriting its own blueprints around me, silently, subtly, driving me to the brink of my sanity. The horror wasn't in grotesque monsters or sudden scares. It was in the quiet, relentless erosion of reality, the feeling of being utterly alone in a space that was actively conspiring against me. I stopped checking my notebook. It was useless. The hotel had no fixed form, no consistent layout. Each night was a new iteration, a new set of impossible corridors and vanishing exits. I just walked. I walked and walked, my feet aching, my mind a fog of exhaustion and fear. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to grow louder, more insistent, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in the polished chrome of an elevator door. A gaunt, hollow-eyed man, his uniform rumpled, his hair disheveled. I barely recognized myself. I don't know how many nights have passed now. The concept of time has blurred. Is it still my first week? Or have months gone by? The sun never penetrates these inner sanctums. The windows in the guest rooms, when I find them, look out onto an identical cityscape, always shrouded in a perpetual, dim twilight. I'm on a floor now. I don't know which one. It feels like all of them and none of them. The corridor stretches endlessly before me, identical door after identical door. The hum is constant, a low, guttural growl that vibrates through the floor. The soft ding of the elevator is a cruel joke, promising escape, but delivering only more of the same. I am trapped, not by locked doors or physical barriers, but by the very architecture of this place. The Grand Elysium is not just a building. It is a living, breathing, shifting entity, and I am merely a part of its endless, silent mechanism. My purpose, I realize now, is not to secure its floors, but to walk them forever. A solitary sentinel in its ever-changing, impossible expanse. And as I walk, my steps echoing in the profound silence, I can feel the walls subtly shifting, the floor beneath my feet subtly lengthening, preparing for yet another endless night. Third story, the answering machine at the end of the world. Clara had always possessed a peculiar fondness for the forgotten. Not in a morbid way, but more like an archaeologist of the everyday, sifting through the detritus of lives lived to unearth treasures. Her apartment, a cozy nest tucked above a sleepy bookstore, was a testament to this inclination. Filled with chipped porcelain figures, faded velvet armchairs, and books whose spines cracked with age. It was this very passion that led her, One rain-slicked Tuesday afternoon, into the dusty embrace of yesterday's echoes. A thrift store known for its eclectic and often baffling inventory. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper and something vaguely metallic, a smell that Clara had come to associate with untold stories. Her fingers, nimble and curious, danced over rows of forgotten electronics, past VCRs that hummed with silent memories, and radios that had once sung of distant lands. Then she saw it, tucked away on a bottom shelf, partially obscured by a stack of yellowed encyclopedias. An answering machine. It was a relic from a bygone era. A beige plastic box with chunky buttons, and a tiny, almost imperceptible speaker grill. A single, clear cassette tape was already nestled within its compartment. A silent promise of a voice waiting to be heard. A wave of nostalgia washed over her. She remembered her grandmother's identical machine, its blinking red light, a beacon of connection in a simpler time. Without a second thought, Clara paid the exorbitant sum of $12 and carried her new acquisition home, the plastic bag crinkling like dry leaves against her leg. Back in her apartment, the rain outside pattered a gentle rhythm against the window pane. Clara cleared a space on her small, antique desk, pushing aside a half-finished crossword puzzle and a mug of lukewarm tea. The answering machine looked oddly out of place amidst her more aesthetically pleasing finds, its utilitarian design a stark contrast to the ornate curves of her other treasures. She found an old power adapter, its cord brittle with age, and plugged the machine into the wall. A faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from within, a sign of life. Her thumb hovered over the play message button. There was a moment of hesitation, a quiet anticipation. What would it hold? A forgotten grocery list? A message from a long-lost friend of the previous owner? A wrong number, perhaps. The possibilities, however mundane, held a certain charm. She pressed the button. A low, distorted hiss filled the air, the sound of ancient magnetic tape struggling to yield its secrets. Then, a voice. It was muffled, as if speaking through a thick blanket, overlaid with a crackle that sounded like static electricity dancing on a winter night. But even through the sonic degradation, Clara recognized it. Or rather, she recognized the timbre, the underlying cadence, the very essence of it. It was her voice, her breath caught in her throat. The voice on the tape was unmistakably hers, yet it was alien. It was older, far older than her 27 years, imbued with a weariness that settled deep in her bones just from listening. There was a tremor in its tone, a raw edge of panic that sent a shiver down her spine. Clara, the voice rasped, the name a distorted whisper that seemed to echo from a great distance. If you're hearing this, it means there's still time. Barely. It's 2 years from now. July 7th. You have to listen. You have to. The date. July 7th. That was today's date, but 2 years in the future. A cold knot tightened in Clara's stomach. This wasn't a prank. The voice was too real, too desperate. Then came the instructions, delivered in a rapid, almost breathless rush, as if the speaker were running out of time, or breath, or both. Don't open the door for the man who smells of rain. He'll offer you a trade. Don't take it. Just Don't open the door. Clara frowned. The man who smells of rain. What did that even mean? The rain was still falling outside, a soft, persistent drumming against the glass. Sell the silver locket, the voice continued, its urgency growing. The one from Aunt Beatrice, sell it. Get rid of it. It's a beacon. They track it. Clara's hand instinctively went to her neck. Beneath her sweater, a thin silver chain rested, from which hung a small, intricately engraved locket. Aunt Beatrice had given it to her on her 18th birthday, a family heirloom passed down through generations. It was a cherished possession, something she rarely took off. The idea of selling it, of getting rid of it, felt like a betrayal. And whatever you do, the voice concluded, dropping to a strained whisper that was almost swallowed by the static. Don't look at the moon on Tuesday. Not on any Tuesday. But especially not the next one. It's different. The message ended abruptly, replaced by the persistent, empty hiss of the tape. Clara sat frozen, her hand still at her throat, the locket suddenly feeling heavy and cold against her skin. The rain outside seemed to intensify, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the window. For a long time, she simply stared at the beige machine, its red message light now dark. Her mind raced, grasping for a logical explanation. A recording of an old radio drama, a sophisticated prank by a particularly cruel friend. But the voice, it was her own. The specific details, the locket, the date, were too precise to be random. She rewound the tape, her finger trembling slightly, and played the message again. The same hiss, the same distorted, panicked voice. Each word, though muffled, resonated with an undeniable authenticity. The weariness was palpable, the fear, a tangible entity that seemed to seep from the tiny speaker. It was the sound of a person at the very edge of their endurance, screaming a warning into the void. Clara tried to rationalize it away. Perhaps the machine had belonged to someone with a similar voice. Maybe it was a coincidence, a bizarre alignment of sounds and words. She even considered that she might be hallucinating, the result of too many late nights and too much strong coffee. But deep down, a seed of dread had been planted, a cold, creeping certainty that refused to be dismissed. The first few days after the discovery were a blur of restless nights and anxious days. Clara found herself constantly glancing at the silver locket, its familiar weight now a source of unease. She even took it off, placing it in a small velvet pouch in her dresser drawer, a temporary reprieve from its unsettling presence. She didn't sell it, not yet. The idea still felt absurd, a superstitious act based on a distorted voice from a thrift store find. Then came Tuesday. The sky had been overcast all day, a dull, uniform gray that promised more rain. As evening approached, a sliver of the moon, a pale crescent, began to peek through the thinning clouds. Clara found herself drawn to the window, an inexplicable compulsion to look. But the voice, her own future voice, echoed in her mind. Don't look at the moon on Tuesday. She pulled the curtains shut with a decisive tug, plunging her living room into a premature twilight. It felt ridiculous, childish even, to be so easily swayed by a recording. Yet, the anxiety that had been gnawing at her all day subsided slightly, replaced by a strange sense of accomplishment. as if she had just averted some unseen peril. She spent the evening with the lights on, reading by the artificial glow, deliberately avoiding any glimpse of the outside world. A week later, the answering machine blinked. The small red light, previously dormant, pulsed with a soft, insistent glow. Clara stared at it for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. Another message, her future self. The thought alone was enough to make her hands clammy. She pressed play. The hiss was more pronounced this time, the voice even more strained, as if the very act of speaking was a monumental effort. Clara, it's getting worse. The rain, it's not just rain. It's in the air. You need to leave. You have to pack. Now, before the man. The voice broke off into a series of ragged coughs, wet and guttural, that sent a fresh wave of nausea through Clara. The man who smells of rain, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Had she seen him? She tried to recall every face, every encounter from the past week. Nothing stood out. He's coming for the locket, the voice continued, its tone frantic. You didn't sell it, did you? You fool. You absolute fool. He knows. He always knows. Get rid of it, Clara. Throw it into the deepest part of the river. Don't let him have it. Clara rushed to her dresser, pulling open the drawer. The velvet pouch lay there, undisturbed. She snatched it up, her fingers fumbling with the drawstring. Her mind screamed at her to throw it away, to follow the desperate instruction. But another part, a stubborn, logical part, resisted. This was insane. She couldn't just discard a family heirloom because of a garbled message. She heard a faint knock at her apartment door. A soft, almost hesitant rap. Clara froze. Her eyes darted to the answering machine, then back to the door. The man who smells of rain. It couldn't be. She crept towards the peephole, her breath held captive in her lungs. Through the distorted lens, she saw a figure. A man. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and he held a large, dark umbrella, its surface still glistening with recent rain. He wore a simple, dark trench coat, and his face was obscured by the shadow of his hat. He looked perfectly ordinary, unremarkable. Yet a primal fear seized Clara. He didn't smell of rain, she thought irrationally. He just had rain on him. He knocked again, a little louder this time. Clara remained motionless, her hand pressed against the cold wood of the door. Her future self's voice screamed in her head. Don't open the door for the man who smells of rain. After what felt like an eternity, the man sighed, a sound that seemed to carry through the thick wood, and turned away. Clara watched him descend the stairs, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet hallway. He left no trace, no card, no explanation. Just the lingering scent of damp earth and the faint, metallic tang of rain. Clara leaned against the door, her knees weak. She hadn't opened it. She had followed the instruction. A wave of relief washed over her, quickly followed by a chilling realization. The messages were real. Too real. From that day forward, the answering machine became the terrifying oracle of her existence. Messages arrived with increasing frequency, sometimes daily, sometimes every few days. Each one was more fragmented, more desperate, the voice of her future self deteriorating along with the quality of the tape. The static grew louder. the words more slurred, as if the speaker were struggling against some unseen force. The lights, they flicker when he's near. One message whispered, punctuated by a series of frantic clicks and whirs. Don't trust the silence. It's a trick. He listens in the quiet. Clara began to notice it. The subtle dimming of the streetlights outside her window, just for a second, before returning to full brightness. The inexplicable silence that would sometimes descend upon her apartment. A heavy, unnatural quiet that felt like a presence. She found herself jumping at every shadow, every creak of the floorboards, her nerves frayed to breaking point. Another message arrived, the voice barely recognizable now, a hoarse croak. The silver locket, did you get rid of it? He found it. He found you. It's too late for me. But you still have time. The river, Clara, the river. The locket. She still had it. It lay in the velvet pouch, untouched. She hadn't been able to bring herself to throw it away. Now, a fresh wave of panic washed over her. He found it. He found her. Was the man who smelled of rain still out there? Was he watching? She grabbed the pouch, her hands shaking, and ran out of her apartment. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, humid, carrying the distinct scent of damp earth. She walked quickly, almost ran, through the familiar streets. Her destination, the small, winding river that cut through the city park. The river, a place of quiet contemplation and gentle currents, now seemed to call to her with an ominous urgency. When she reached the riverbank, the water flowed sluggishly, reflecting the bruised twilight sky. She pulled the locket from the pouch, its silver surface gleaming dully in the fading light. It felt like a burden, a cursed object. With a silent prayer, she hurled it into the murky depths. It sank without a trace, a tiny splash swallowed by the indifferent current. A strange sense of emptiness settled over her. She had done it. She had followed the instruction. But had it made a difference? Or was it already too late, as her future self had warned? The messages continued, each one painting a more terrifying picture of a world in decline. They spoke of a sky that was wrong, of shadows that moved when there was no light, of a pervasive cold that seeped into everything. The future Clara's voice was now a mere whisper, punctuated by desperate, gasping breaths. The moon, it's its full tonight, a message crackled through the static, the words barely intelligible. Don't look. Don't let it see you. It changes things. It was Tuesday again. A full moon, a luminous orb, hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the city. Clara was at her window, drawn by an irresistible pull. Her curtains were open, and the moonlight, a silvery, ethereal glow, spilled into her room. It was beautiful, serene, almost hypnotic. But the voice, don't look at the moon on Tuesday. She fought against the urge, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, on the floor, anywhere but the window. But the light was pervasive, seeping into every corner of the room, bathing everything in an otherworldly luminescence. She could feel its presence, a cold, silent gaze. Her resolve began to crumble. Just a glance, she thought. What harm could it do? She had thrown away the locket, avoided the man. Surely, one look at the moon wouldn't condemn her. Slowly, agonizingly, her gaze drifted towards the window. The moon hung there, impossibly large, impossibly bright. It wasn't just white. There was a faint, pulsating green hue at its edges, a subtle, sickly glow that seemed to throb with an unseen energy. And as she stared, something shifted, not in the moon itself, but in the shadows it cast. They seemed to deepen, to writhe, to take on a life of their own. The familiar shapes of her furniture distorted, becoming monstrous, elongated. The air in the room grew heavy, cold, filled with an oppressive silence that pressed down on her. A new message. The answering machine had blinked again. She hadn't even noticed. This one was different. There was no static, no distortion. The voice was clear, crisp, almost too clear. It was her voice, present-day Clara, speaking with a calm, unnerving certainty. "Clara," the voice said, devoid of any emotion. "You looked at the moon, didn't you?" "I knew you would. I always do." Clara stumbled back from the window, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This wasn't her future self. This was her. Now, the messages, the voice continued, a chilling echo of her own thoughts. They weren't from the future, Clara. They were from the past. From me, from before, trying to warn you, trying to save you from this. A profound, sickening realization dawned on Clara. The messages weren't warnings from a future catastrophe. They were echoes of her own desperate attempts to change a past that was already unfolding. The man who smelled of rain, the silver locket, the moon on Tuesday. These weren't future events to be avoided, but past choices already made, already sealing her fate. The voice on the answering machine, her own voice, continued, its tone flat, resigned. "It's not the end of the world, Clara. Not in the way you think. It's just the world has changed. And so have we. The moon, it opens the door. And the man, he's just the usher." Clara looked out the window again. The moon still hung there, its green aura now more pronounced, pulsating with a rhythmic, almost predatory glow. The shadows in her room danced, no longer just shadows, but indistinct forms that seemed to coalesce and dissipate at the edges of her vision. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that muffled even the sound of her own ragged breathing. She touched her face. Her skin felt cold, strangely smooth, as if a layer of something familiar had been peeled away. She looked at her reflection in the darkened windowpane, illuminated by the eerie moonlight. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, seemed darker, deeper, reflecting the green glow of the moon with an unsettling intensity. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer seemed to emanate from her, a subtle luminescence that mirrored the moon's own strange light. The answering machine clicked, signaling the end of the message. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the machine, a sound that now seemed to resonate with the strange, new hum within her own body. She walked slowly to the answering machine, her movements fluid, almost graceful. Her fingers, no longer trembling, reached for the record button. She pressed it, and the red light blinked on, a familiar, yet terrifyingly new beacon. She leaned close to the tiny microphone, her lips almost touching the plastic. Her voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of panic. It was the voice that had just spoken to her from the machine. "Clara," she began, speaking into the past, into the void. If you're hearing this, it means there's still time. Barely. It's 2 years from now. July 7th. You have to listen. You have to. The rain outside had stopped. The air was still heavy and carried the distinct metallic tang of something new. Something that was not just damp earth, but a subtle, pervasive scent that Clara now recognized as her own. The scent of rain. Fourth story, the scent of stillness. My name is Alaric, and for decades, my life has been a silent symphony of molecules. I am, or perhaps was, a master perfumer, one who sought not merely to blend pleasant notes, but to capture the very essence of experience in a bottle. Others chased the bloom of jasmine or the warmth of ambergris. I pursued the intangible, the whispers of memory, the echoes of forgotten places. I bottled the melancholy of a twilight rain, the exhilaration of a mountain summit, the quiet dignity of ancient libraries. Each creation was a meditation, a fragment of the world rendered olfactory. But there was one scent that eluded me, one elusive note that became my obsession, eclipsing all others. It was not a scent born of nature, nor of human endeavor. It was the scent of absence, the aroma of absolute silence. Not merely the quiet of a deserted room, but the profound, resonant stillness that exists beyond the reach of sound. The kind of silence that presses in on you, that makes your own heartbeat seem deafening. I yearned to capture that void, to distill the very air of non-existence into a wearable fragrance. My workshop, once a bustling sanctuary of fragrant chaos, transformed into a hermitage. I dismissed my apprentices, closed my doors to clients, and plunged into a solitude as profound as the scent I sought. The world outside, with its cacophony of commerce and conversation, became a distant, irrelevant hum. My days and nights blurred into a single, endless pursuit, illuminated only by the soft glow of my alembics and the flickering gas lamps. I began by dissecting the quietest moments I had ever known. The hush of a deep forest after a fresh snowfall, where every sound is muffled, absorbed by the pristine white blanket. I sought out the essence of cold stone in a crypt, that heavy, ancient quiet that seems to absorb light and sound alike. I experimented with petrichor, the earthy perfume of rain on dry ground, not for its vibrant freshness, but for the profound stillness that often precedes or follows a downpour, when the world holds its breath. My initial attempts were predictably failures. I produced concoctions that smelled of damp earth, of mildewed paper, of ozone after a storm. They were interesting, even beautiful in their own right, but they were not it. They were scents of things that existed in silence, not the silence itself. I needed to go deeper, to strip away the physical and reach for the ethereal. I sourced ingredients from the most remote corners of the globe, substances whispered about in hushed tones by ancient alchemists and forgotten shamans. There was a resin, dark and brittle, gathered from trees that grew only in caves where no light had ever touched. Its scent was faint, almost imperceptible, like the memory of something that had never truly been there. I acquired a crystalline powder, said to be the dust of meteorites that had fallen in uninhabited deserts, carrying with it the vacuum of space. Its aroma was sharp, metallic, yet strangely clean, like the edge of a new blade. My hands, once nimble and precise, became stained with strange pigments and scarred by minor chemical burns. My eyes, once bright with artistic fervor, grew shadowed with fatigue and an almost manic intensity. I spoke only to myself, murmuring formulas and incantations over bubbling flasks. The air in my workshop grew thick with the ghosts of failed experiments, a cloying tapestry of forgotten aromas. Then one moonless night, as a profound quiet settled over the city, I felt a shift. It was not a sudden revelation, but a gradual unfolding, like a flower blooming in slow motion. I had combined the cave resin with the meteorite dust, a few drops of a distilled essence of pure, filtered air, and a single, almost microscopic fragment of a rare, non-reactive metal that hummed with an imperceptible vibration when held just so. The mixture was clear, almost like water, yet it shimmered with an inner light, a faint, opalescent glow. I dipped a glass rod into the solution and brought it to my wrist. The scent was not a scent in the traditional sense. It was a cessation, a drawing in. The ambient hum of the city, which I had long since learned to filter out, suddenly vanished. The distant clang of a trolley, the faint murmur of voices from the street below, the creak of my old floorboards, all of it simply ceased. It wasn't that the sounds were muffled, they were gone. It was as if a perfect, invisible sphere of absolute stillness had enveloped me. A profound, almost dizzying peace descended. My own breathing seemed loud, my heartbeat a drum against the sudden, overwhelming quiet. It was beautiful, truly. A pocket of perfect peace in a world of incessant noise. I closed my eyes, savoring the sensation, feeling the pressure of the silence against my eardrums. This was it. I had done it. I had bottled stillness. I called my creation Aura Tranquilla, the tranquil aura. For days, I wore it constantly, reveling in the serene bubble it provided. I walked through the bustling markets, a silent observer in a symphony of shouts and laughter. I sat in crowded cafes, sipping tea in a world of muted gestures and unheard conversations. The peace was intoxicating, a balm to my overstimulated senses. I felt detached, serene, almost transcendent. But then the first anomaly occurred. It was subtle, so subtle that I almost dismissed it as a trick of the mind. I was sitting in my workshop, enjoying the profound quiet, when a faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted past me. It was the scent of damp soil, not the rich, loamy earth of a garden, but the cold, heavy aroma of soil from deep underground, perhaps from a freshly dug grave. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined it. The next time I wore Aura Tranquilla, the scent returned, stronger this time, and with it, something else. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood or rusted iron. It was unsettling, a discordant note in my perfect symphony of silence. I frowned, inspecting my vials, wondering if some impurity had contaminated my masterpiece. But the liquid was pristine, the scent only appearing when the Aura Tranquilla was active. My piece began to fray. The damp soil and metallic scents became more frequent, more pronounced. They would appear, linger for a moment, then dissipate, leaving me with a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I started to feel watched. Not with eyes, but with a presence that seemed to press in from the edges of my silent sphere. One evening, as I sat in my darkened workshop, the aura tranquilla clinging to me like a second skin, the sense returned. Damp soil, strong and cloying, metallic, sharp and acrid. And then, a new note, one that sent a shiver down my spine. Ozone. The sharp, clean scent of lightning, of something immense and powerful having just passed. But there had been no storm, and with the ozone I felt it. A shift in the air, a displacement that was not a breeze. The silence, once a comforting embrace, now felt like a suffocating blanket. It was too perfect, too absolute. It was the silence of a tomb, not of peace. I found myself holding my breath, straining to hear something, anything, beyond the perfect stillness. And that's when the true horror began. I didn't hear a sound from the outside, but I heard the absence of sounds that should have been there. The faint, almost imperceptible creak of my house settling, the distant rumble of a cart on the cobblestones, the rustle of leaves outside my window, all gone. And in their place, within the profound vacuum of my aura tranquilla, I started to perceive something else. It wasn't a sound I could describe with words. It was a pressure, a vibration against my inner ear, a sensation of vastness moving through the unyielding quiet. It was like feeling the wind without hearing it, or seeing a shadow without the object that cast it. It was the auditory impression of something immense, something formless, gliding through the profound stillness that I had created. The sense intensified. The damp soil was now thick, as if I were buried alive. The metallic tang was sharp, like a fresh wound. And the ozone crackled, not with electricity, but with an unseen energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I tried to remove the perfume, to wash it off, but it seemed to have permeated my very skin. The stillness clung to me, a persistent, terrifying shroud. I paced my workshop, my heart hammering against my ribs, each beat a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. The predatory scent began to emerge. It was subtle at first, a faint, musky undertone beneath the damp earth and ozone. But it grew, becoming more distinct, more animalistic. It was the scent of something that hunted, something that stalked, something that saw the perfect stillness as an invitation. I started to see things, not with my eyes, but with my periphery, with the corners of my vision. Fleeting, almost transparent distortions in the air, like heat shimmering off asphalt, but cold. They were never directly in my line of sight, always just beyond, hinting at forms that defied description. And they were always accompanied by the growing intensity of those terrifying scents. The silence, my beautiful creation, was no longer empty. It was filled with the unseen, the unheard, the unperceived, save for the horrifying olfactory trail they left in their wake. They were attracted to the void, to the absence of the world's clamor. My perfect peace was a beacon, drawing them from whatever abyssal spaces they inhabited. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to use the perfume, yet terrified of what might happen if I stopped. The silence had become a part of me, a constant hum of nothingness that I could no longer escape. Even when I tried to ignore it, the world outside seemed muted, distant. The aura tranquilla had altered my perception, perhaps permanently. The damp soil scent became a constant companion, a reminder of the grave that seemed to be opening around me. The metallic tang was the taste of fear in my mouth. And the ozone was the breath of the things that now shared my silent world. I would wake in the dead of night, not to a sound, but to the overwhelming presence of them, pressing against the invisible wall of my stillness. I would smell the damp soil, the metallic tang, the ozone, and the increasingly potent predatory musk, all converging, all closing in. I could feel their proximity, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. They were learning to navigate my silent sphere, learning to exist within its perfect, terrifying vacuum. And I, the master perfumer, the creator of the scent of stillness, was now their unwitting host, their silent prey. The last time I used it, truly used it, was a mistake born of desperation. I had hoped to find a moment of respite, a return to that initial, intoxicating peace. But as the world faded into silence, the scents erupted around me with a ferocity that stole my breath. The damp soil was overwhelming. The metallic tang burned my nostrils, and the predatory musk was so strong I could almost taste it. And then, in the absolute, crushing stillness, I felt something brush against my cheek. Not a physical touch, but a cold, almost gaseous caress. And with it, a new scent, one that solidified my terror, the faint, sweet decay of something ancient, something that had been dead for a very, very long time, yet was still moving. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips within the sphere of aura tranquilla. My scream was absorbed, swallowed by the profound, perfect silence I had so painstakingly created. And in that terrifying, unheard scream, I knew. They were here. They had arrived. And they had come for the man who had dared to bottle the scent of their world. Now I live in a perpetual state of dread. The perfume is gone, shattered in my panic, but its effects linger. The world is still muted, distant. And in the quiet moments, especially when the city sleeps, the scents return. Damp soil, metallic, ozone, and the predatory musk, closer now than ever before. They are always with me, drawn by the lingering echo of my creation, by the profound, unnatural stillness that now defines my existence. And I know, with chilling certainty, that one day, the silence will finally be complete, and I will be gone, leaving behind only the faintest, most terrifying scent of stillness. Fifth story. Don't look in the glass on a rainy night. The first thing you noticed about Havenwood was the rain. Not just a drizzle, not a storm, but a pervasive, almost sentient mist that clung to everything. It wasn't violent, it was persistent. A soft, gray blanket that muffled sound and softened edges. We moved there in late summer, my parents drawn by the promise of cheaper land and a slower pace. A return to nature, they called it. I called it a one-way ticket to eternal dampness. Our new house was old, a charming Victorian with bay windows that overlooked a perpetually sodden garden. From the moment we arrived, the rain was a constant companion, drumming softly on the roof, tracing intricate patterns down the glass, and painting the world in shades of muted green and gray. The air always smelled of wet earth and ancient wood. The town itself, was small, nestled deep in a valley that seemed to funnel the clouds directly over us. The people were polite, almost unnervingly so. They offered help with boxes, brought over casseroles, and smiled with a quiet warmth that felt genuine. But there was something else, too. A shared understanding, a subtle current beneath the surface of their pleasantries. It manifested most clearly in their windows. Every house in Havenwood, without exception, had heavy, opaque curtains. Not just blinds or drapes, but thick velvet or woolen coverings that, when drawn, seemed to seal off the interior completely. Even during the day, many were partially closed, letting in only slivers of the soft, diffused light. At night, they were always drawn tight. My mother, ever the curious one, asked our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, about it. Mrs. Gable was a kindly woman with eyes that seemed to hold generations of quiet wisdom. She smiled, a little sadly, and said, "Oh dear, you'll learn soon enough. It's just what we do here. On a rainy night, you never, ever look in the glass." She said it with such casual certainty, as if it were as natural as breathing. My dad chuckled, dismissing it as a quaint local superstition. "Probably just keeps the heat in, eh?" he joked. Mrs. Gable just offered another one of her knowing, gentle smiles and changed the subject. But the rule lingered. It was mentioned in passing by the postman, hinted at by the woman in the general store, and even whispered by the few kids I met at the small local school. Don't look in the glass on a rainy night. It became a quiet mantra of Havenwood, a bizarre piece of folklore that everyone seemed to accept without question. I, being a 17-year-old, found it utterly ridiculous. What was the worst that could happen? Would my reflection turn into a monster? Would it steal my soul? It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie, not a genuine concern for grown adults. The more they insisted, the more a rebellious spark ignited within me. It felt like a challenge, a test of my own rationality against their collective, unspoken fear. The rain, meanwhile, continued its relentless performance. Days bled into weeks, and the sun became a distant memory. A rumor whispered on the rare occasions the clouds thinned enough to reveal a pale, watery glow. The constant drumming on the roof, the endless sheen on the streets, the damp chill that seeped into your bones. It all became the new normal. And with it, the quiet anxiety of the townspeople seemed to deepen. Their smiles remained, but their eyes held a certain weariness, a vigilance that never quite faded. Our house, despite its age, was surprisingly cozy. My parents had made it home, filling it with the familiar clutter of our lives. But even here, the windows felt different. They seemed to absorb the outside, becoming dark, reflective pools at night. I'd catch glimpses of myself in them, a shadowy figure superimposed on the vague shapes of the garden beyond, and a shiver, not entirely from the cold, would run down my spine. One particularly dark and wet evening, the rain was a solid wall of sound against the house. It was a Friday, and my parents were out at some town meeting, leaving me alone with my textbooks and the oppressive quiet. The house felt vast and hollow. The wind, usually a gentle sigh, now moaned through the eaves. The windows, uncurtained in my room, were black mirrors, reflecting the dim glow of my desk lamp. I stared at my reflection, my face a pale oval in the dark glass. The superstition gnawed at me. "Don't look in the glass on a rainy night." The words echoed in my mind, amplified by the drumming rain. It was so stupid, so utterly, completely stupid. And yet, the town's unwavering adherence to it was unsettling. What if there was something to it? What if they knew something I didn't? The thought was fleeting. Curiosity and a healthy dose of teenage defiance won out. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked slowly towards the largest window in my room. The glass was cool against my fingertips as I pressed them to the pane. My reflection stared back, a mirror image of my own slightly apprehensive face. I raised my hand slowly, deliberately. My reflection mirrored the movement. I lowered it. It followed. Nothing, just a reflection. I scoffed, a small, triumphant sound in the quiet room. "See," I muttered to myself. "Nothing, just glass." Then I noticed it. A tiny, almost imperceptible lag. I raised my hand again, a little faster this time. My reflection's hand began to rise, but it was a fraction of a second behind. Not much, barely noticeable, but it was there. Like a poorly synced video, a subtle stutter in the flow of reality. My breath hitched. I dropped my hand quickly. My reflection's hand dropped. The delay was still there, but it was so slight, I could almost convince myself it was my imagination, a trick of the light, or perhaps just my own fatigue. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. I moved my head from side to side. The reflection followed, still with that minuscule, unsettling delay. My heart began to beat a little faster, a nervous flutter in my chest. This wasn't right. Reflections were instantaneous. They were perfect copies, not echoes. I tried to rationalize it. Old house, old glass, maybe some distortion. But the glass was clear, perfectly smooth. There was no visible flaw that could explain it. I backed away from the window, my eyes fixed on my own image. It felt like watching a recording of myself, playing back on a slight delay. The thought was absurd, but it was the only one that fit. I spent the rest of the evening trying to ignore it, burying my nose in my textbooks, but my gaze kept drifting back to the window. Every time I glanced, I saw my reflection, frozen in whatever position I had been in a moment before, then slowly catching up. It was like a silent, unnerving game of Simon Says, where Simon was always a beat behind. When my parents returned, the house felt less empty, but the unsettling feeling remained. I didn't tell them. How could I? My reflection is delayed, Mom. The window is broken. They'd think I was losing my mind, or just being a dramatic teenager. I decided to keep it to myself, to observe, to see if it was just a one-time oddity. The next day, the rain continued, of course. It always did. I avoided looking directly into the windows, a subconscious avoidance born of the previous night's unease. But as dusk settled and the house grew dark, the black mirrors of the windows once again called to me. I stood before the same window in my room, a strange mix of dread and morbid fascination swirling within me. I raised my hand. The reflection followed. This time, the delay was undeniable. It was longer, perhaps half a second. My hand would be halfway up before its hand even began to stir. It was like a sluggish, reluctant twin. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't my imagination. This was real, and it was terrifying. I tried to move quickly to test its limits. I snapped my fingers. The reflection's fingers snapped, a distinct click sound seeming to echo from the glass, but noticeably after mine. I jumped back, a gasp escaping my lips. My reflection, still catching up, seemed to freeze for a moment, its eyes wide, mimicking my own shock. Then, slowly, it continued its delayed movements, its hand still in the process of dropping from the snap. It was like watching a ghost, a lingering imprint of myself, trapped just behind the glass. I started drawing the curtains in my room at night, pulling them tight, trying to block out the unsettling presence. But the knowledge that it was there, just beyond the fabric, was enough to keep me awake. I'd lie in bed, listening to the rain, imagining my reflection, slowly, painstakingly, catching up to all the movements I had made throughout the day. The thought was maddening. Days turned into another week. The rain never stopped. My sleep became fractured, haunted by vague, unsettling dreams. I felt a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. The townspeople's quiet vigilance suddenly made a lot more sense. They weren't superstitious, they were simply careful. One afternoon, a particularly heavy downpour had turned the world outside into a blurry watercolor. I was in the living room reading when I felt a strange, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I looked up, my eyes drawn to the large bay window that overlooked the front yard. The curtains were open, letting in the dim, gray light. My reflection was there, but I wasn't moving. I was sitting perfectly still, my book open on my lap. Yet, my reflection, it shifted, just slightly. Its head tilted, a barely perceptible movement that wasn't mine. Its eyes, my eyes, seemed to scan the room slowly, deliberately, as if taking in its surroundings. My blood ran cold. I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The reflection was still, its head now tilted at a slightly different angle, its gaze fixed on something just beyond my line of sight. It was no longer mimicking me. It was acting on its own. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was beyond a delay. This was agency. A version of myself, trapped behind the glass, was now beginning to move independently. It was watching. It was learning. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. I watched, horrified, as my reflection slowly, almost imperceptibly, raised its hand. It wasn't mirroring my movement, because I hadn't moved. Its fingers stretched out, reaching towards the glass, as if trying to touch the surface. Then its lips parted, slowly. My own lips were pressed tightly together. Its mouth formed a silent word. I couldn't make it out. It was too dark, too subtle. But the movement was unmistakable. It was trying to speak. I finally broke free, scrambling backward, knocking over the small coffee table. The crash echoed loudly in the silent house. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I ran, blindly, towards the front door. My only thought to get out, to escape the house, to escape the thing in the glass. I burst out into the relentless rain, the cold drops stinging my face, but I barely noticed. I ran down the street, past the houses, with their tightly drawn curtains, past the quiet, watchful eyes of Havenwood. I ran until my lungs burned, until I couldn't run anymore, collapsing onto the wet grass of the town square. I lay there, shivering, soaked to the bone, the rain washing over me. The fear was a living thing in my chest, a cold, suffocating weight. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that the thing in the glass was no longer just a reflection. It was something else entirely. Something that was slowly, patiently, gaining its own life, its own will, trapped just beyond the thin barrier of the window pane. I never looked in the glass on a rainy night again. I drew the curtains in my room, and in every other room of the house, pulling them tight, ensuring not even a sliver of light could escape or enter. My parents, seeing my pale face and haunted eyes, assumed I was just struggling with the move, with the constant rain. They didn't push. They just offered quiet comfort and their own knowing, gentle smiles. But I knew. Every time the rain began its soft, insistent drumming, I could feel it. A presence, a pair of eyes, my eyes, watching from behind the dark glass, waiting for the moment when the delay would finally cease, when the mimicry would end, and the reflection would be truly, terrifyingly free. And I knew, with a certainty that made my blood run cold, that when that day came, it wouldn't be me looking out into the world. It would be the other me, finally stepping through the glass, leaving me trapped, an empty echo, forever watching from the other side. The rain, of course, never stopped. It never does in Havenwood, and neither, I suspect, does the waiting. Sixth story, the street where the houses breathe, the cul-de-sac of Oakhaven Lane, was a testament to suburban uniformity. Each house, a meticulous replica of its neighbor, stood with an almost defiant sameness. They were all two-story, with muted brick facades, perfectly manicured lawns, and identical bay windows. When Sarah and I moved into number 7, it was the very picture of tranquil conformity we craved. For months, life was a predictable, comforting rhythm of commutes, weekend barbecues, and the gentle hum of lawnmowers on Saturday mornings. Then the subtle shifts began. It started with the house directly across from us, number 8. One Tuesday morning, as I sipped my coffee, gazing out our kitchen window, I noticed something about its front door. It had always been a deep, almost plum red. But that morning, it seemed richer, a fraction darker perhaps. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, or perhaps a new coat of paint I hadn't noticed. Sarah, when I mentioned it, merely shrugged. Probably just a fresh lick, darling. Mrs. Henderson is always redecorating. The next week, it was the brickwork of number 6, 2 doors down on the opposite side. I was hosing down our driveway, admiring the perfect symmetry of the cul-de-sac, when my eyes caught on its wall. The bricks, usually a consistent, even shade of terracotta, appeared to have a faint, almost imperceptible mottling, like a faint blush spreading across a pallid cheek. Again, I tried to rationalize it. A peculiar stain, perhaps, or a new type of lichen growing on the mortar. But the pattern wasn't random. It seemed to follow the very grain of the bricks, subtly emphasizing their individual contours. I started taking pictures with my phone, casually at first. Just quick snaps as I left for work or walked the dog. I wanted to see if my memory was playing tricks on me, comparing the images side by side was like looking at two nearly identical frames from a stop-motion animation, where only the most minute details had shifted. The shade of the door on number 8 was darker. The brickwork on number 6 was mottled. It wasn't my imagination. My wife, Sarah, a woman of pragmatic sensibilities, grew increasingly concerned. When I pointed out a slight alteration in the texture of the window frames on number 10, they seemed to have gone from a smooth, painted wood to something with a faint, almost fibrous quality, like tightly woven linen. She gently suggested I might be overtired. "You've been working too many late nights, dear," she'd say, her brow furrowed with a mixture of sympathy and bewilderment. "Perhaps a vacation would do you good." My neighbors, when I tentatively broached the subject, offered similar platitudes. Mr. Davies from number 9, a retired accountant with a penchant for precise measurements, just chuckled. "Houses are static, lad. They don't just up and change." He said it with a kind of reassuring finality that made me feel like an eccentric child pointing out imaginary monsters under the bed. Mrs. Henderson, from number 8, the very woman whose door had started my quiet descent, smiled serenely. "Oh, that old door. No, dear, it's always been this shade. Must be the light." Their responses only fueled my obsession. It wasn't just that they didn't see it. It was that they seemed genuinely incapable of seeing it, like a blind spot in their collective perception, or a perfectly executed sleight of hand that only I was privy to. I began to keep a meticulous journal. Not just photographs, but detailed sketches, color swatches, even small, annotated maps of the cul-de-sac, marking the perceived alterations with a neurotic precision. The changes continued, growing more frequent, more pronounced, yet still subtle enough to deny to the casual observer. The gutters on number 5, once a dull aluminum, now possessed a faint, almost metallic sheen, like the iridescent scales of a beetle. The roof tiles of number 7, our own house, seemed to ripple almost imperceptibly in the sunlight, as if the very surface was made of something pliable, not rigid. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. The thought was a cold, creeping tendril of fear that wrapped itself around my sanity. But then, I'd look at my journal, at the undeniable visual evidence, and the fear would transmute into a different kind of dread. A dread that perhaps everyone else was blind. I spent hours gazing out our windows, particularly at number 8, directly opposite. It became my primary focus, my unwitting laboratory subject. I watched it with a desperate intensity, searching for the moment of transformation. The shifts were never instantaneous. They were like the slow, deliberate blooming of a flower, or the almost imperceptible growth of a child. You only noticed the difference when you compared it to how it used to be. One evening, I was particularly fixated on number 8. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, bathing the cul-de-sac in a warm, golden glow. I had just noted in my journal that the decorative shutters on number 8, previously a deep forest green, now seemed to possess a deeper, almost velvety texture, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. As the light faded, giving way to the soft twilight, I continued to watch. The streetlights flickered on, casting their familiar yellow glow. And then I saw it. It was so slight, so gradual, that for a terrifying moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, or that the fatigue had finally broken through my last vestiges of rational thought. But it persisted. The entire structure of number 8, from its brick foundation to its roofline, seemed to swell. Not an outward expansion that would crack mortar or shatter glass, but a soft, internal expansion, a gentle heaving. And then, an equally slow, almost imperceptible contraction. It was breathing. The house was breathing. Slow, rhythmic inhalation. A silent, almost fluid expansion. And then a gradual, deliberate exhalation. A gentle drawing in of its very form. It was like watching a sleeping giant, its massive chest rising and falling in the quiet twilight. My breath hitched in my own throat, a sharp, ragged gasp that seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence of the room. I pressed my face against the cool glass, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The window frames, which I had previously noted as having a fibrous quality, now seemed to ripple with each subtle contraction, like taut skin flexing over muscle. The bay window, which had always seemed fixed and inert, now possessed a faint, almost translucent quality, as if the glass itself was a membrane, allowing light to filter through, but also hinting at something organic beneath. I tried to call Sarah, to scream for her to come and see, but my voice was a strangled croak. My hand fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so violently I could barely grip it. I aimed the camera, focusing on the rhythmic expansion and contraction of number 8. The video, I knew, would be useless. The subtle movements were too minute for a phone camera to capture, too nuanced for a flat image to convey. They were movements that registered in the liminal space between sight and pure, primal sensation. The fear was no longer about losing my mind. It was about what I had found. The fear was that the houses on Oakhaven Lane were not inanimate structures of brick and mortar, but living, growing organisms. They were chameleons of concrete, slowly, imperceptibly, altering their skin, adapting to some unseen, unspoken purpose. And I, alone, seemed to be the only one who truly saw their monstrous, quiet life. I spent the entire night watching. As the moon ascended, casting its pale light over the cul-de-sac, the breathing of number 8 continued. With each rhythmic pulse, I could almost feel the subtle vibrations through the ground, a low, resonant thrumming that seemed to bypass my ears and directly penetrate my very bones. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with the unspoken secret of the living houses. By dawn, the breathing had subsided, or perhaps it had simply become so slow, so faint, that it was indistinguishable from the stillness of the early morning. Number 8 stood as it always had, seemingly inert, a perfect replica of its neighbors. But I knew. I had seen. Sarah found me at the window, still and pale, my eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She touched my arm, her touch hesitant, full of a deep, sorrowful concern. "Are you all right, darling?" she asked, her voice soft, imbued with the kind of pity reserved for the truly unwell. I turned to her, my voice hoarse. "They're alive, Sarah," I whispered, the words tumbling out, heavy with the weight of my terrifying revelation. "The houses, they breathe." She looked at me, her eyes clouded with an unbearable sadness. She didn't argue, didn't try to rationalize. She simply hugged me, a gesture of comfort that felt more like a commiseration with my complete breakdown. I continued my observations, my journal growing thicker, my entries more desperate. The changes became bolder, though still eluding the notice of anyone but me. The roof tiles on number 12 began to curl at the edges, like the petals of a dying flower. The front door of number 4 seemed to develop faint, almost vein-like patterns just beneath its surface. The fear now was not just of the houses, but of my own isolation. I was trapped in a cul-de-sac of living giants, surrounded by people who saw only brick and wood, when I saw flesh and bone. The uniformity of Oakhaven Lane, once a comfort, became a suffocating shroud, a perfect camouflage for the monstrous, quiet life that pulsed beneath its picture-perfect facade. And sometimes, late at night, when the street was silent and dark, and I stood at my window, watching the identical houses sleep, I could almost hear it. A faint, low thrum, a collective, rhythmic exhalation from every house on the lane. A synchronized breath that seemed to pull the very air from my lungs, leaving me gasping, alone, in a world that quietly, horrifyingly, breathed around me. 7th story, the diver's log. Log entry 1, Project Cerberus, deployment day 3. Depth, 1,200 meters. This is diver Mark Thorne, commencing initial system checks from the nearest habitat. Pressure integrity nominal. Life support systems green. External temperature, a chilling 2 degrees Celsius. The descent was uneventful, a slow, methodical plunge into the deep. It's always the same, that initial sensation of the surface world receding, the light fatting, until you're enveloped in absolute, impenetrable blackness. Down here, light is a luxury, something you carry with you, a fragile bubble against the infinite void. My viewports are currently displaying nothing but the inky black, save for the occasional fleeting flicker of bioluminescence. Small, curious things, like scattered embers in a vast, dark hearth. The pipeline section, designated Hydra 7, is approximately 200 meters below my current position. Tomorrow, I'll begin the first phase of structural integrity assessments. Routine work, but down here, nothing ever truly feels routine. The silence is profound, broken only by the hum of the habitat's machinery and the steady rhythm of my own breath. It's a strange kind of solitude, one that presses in on you, not just from the water outside, but from within the very walls of this tiny metal shell. Over and out. Log entry 2, Project Cerberus, deployment day 5. Depth, 1,200 meters. Mark Thorne reporting. First EVA completed. Visibility was, as expected, 0 without the ROV's powerful floodlights. The pipeline itself is in surprisingly good condition, considering the stresses it endures. The primary task was deploying the seismic sensors along the section. The work is slow, precise. Every movement is deliberate, hampered by the pressure and the sheer scale of the environment. Out there in the suit, you feel like an alien, a clumsy visitor in a world that never truly wanted you. I saw a few more of those luminous creatures today. One, in particular, was quite striking. A long, ribbon-like form, pulsing with a soft, blue glow. It drifted past the viewport of the habitat while I was cycling out of the lock. Beautiful, in a terrifying, ephemeral way. It's a reminder of how little we truly know about this place, how much life thrives in conditions we can barely comprehend. The pressure outside is immense, a constant, silent threat. You feel it in the way the habitat groans, in the subtle shifts of the metal. It's a constant companion, that crushing weight. But it's also what keeps you focused, keeps you sharp. No room for error down here. All systems nominal, preparing for rest cycle. Thorn out. Log entry 3, Project Cerberus, deployment day 7. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn. The isolation is starting to settle in, as it always does. 3 days since the last surface communication, and the next isn't for another 48 hours. It's just me, the Nereus, and the endless dark. Today was spent calibrating the long-range sonar. We need accurate readings of the trench floor for future expansion plans. The pings echo out into the void, a rhythmic pulse, searching for echoes. It's a peculiar feeling, sending out sound waves into something so vast and empty, waiting for them to return. Hopping, they bring back something meaningful. Most of the returns are just the expected geological formations, abyssal plains, occasional seamounts, the trench wall itself. Nothing out of the ordinary. The bioluminescent activity seems to have picked up slightly. More of those shimmering forms, dancing just beyond the reach of the habitat's dim external lights. They're mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. Sometimes I just watch them, losing myself in their silent ballet. It's a stark contrast to the rigid, mechanical world inside the habitat. The air is recycled, slightly stale. Every sound is amplified. The hum of the life support, the faint creak of the hull, the drip of condensation. It's a symphony of claustrophobia. Thorn, logging off for the day. Log entry 4, Project Cerberus, deployment day 9. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn reporting. Something unusual on the sonar. I was running a routine sweep of the deeper trench section, about 5 kilometers below my current position, when I picked up a return. It's large, very large, and it's moving. Not like a current, not like a geological shift. It's a distinct, deliberate movement. The initial reading was vague, a massive, indistinct blob on the screen. I recalibrated, ran the sweep again, focused the beam. The return is still there. It's not a known marine animal, not in any database I have access to. The size alone rules out everything from whales to giant squid. This thing, it's immense. The sonar pings are hitting it, and the echoes are strong, consistent. It's too deep for any conventional submersibles. Too deep for anything we've ever encountered, frankly. My heart is thumping a little faster than it should be. It's probably just some unknown geological anomaly, a strange rock formation that's giving off an odd return. But the movement, it's what's bothering me. It's not random. It feels purposeful. I'm going to keep monitoring it. Thorn out. Log entry 5, Project Cerberus, deployment day 10. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn. The anomaly is still there. It hasn't moved significantly, but it's still registering on the sonar. I've been running continuous sweeps for the past 12 hours, and something else is happening. It's subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but I'm hearing echoes that aren't mine. My sonar sends out a distinct, high-frequency ping, a short, sharp burst, and now, sometimes, after my ping returns, there's another. A faint, almost ghost-like echo. It's not a reflection. It's response. It's mimicking my pings. The same frequency, the same duration, but slightly delayed. It's like it's listening and then repeating. My mind is trying to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation. Thermal layers, unusual water density, some kind of acoustic interference. But the pattern, it's too precise, too deliberate. I'm starting to feel a chill that has nothing to do with the external temperature. This is not a rock. This is not an animal. This is something else. And it's aware. Thorn over and out. Log entry 6. Project Cerberus. Deployment day 11. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn. It's communicating. I'm sure of it now. The echoes are no longer just simple mimicry. They're forming patterns, sequences of clicks and pauses. It's like a conversation, albeit a very alien one. I've been trying to respond, varying the rhythm of my pings, trying to see if it reacts. And it does. It changes its own patterns in response. It's learning. Or perhaps it's always known, and I'm just now catching up. The sheer scale of this thing. It's still registering as an enormous mass, hundreds of meters across, maybe more. It's too deep to see, even with the most powerful lights. It exists only as a series of echoes, a presence in the dark. The claustrophobia is tightening its grip. This habitat, which once felt like a sanctuary, now feels like a prison. A very small, very fragile prison, surrounded by something vast and unknowable. I haven't slept properly in 2 days. Every time I close my eyes, I hear those pings, those alien responses, echoing in the blackness. My professional detachment is eroding. This is no longer just a job. This is something else entirely. Thorn, signing off. Log entry 7. Project Cerberus, deployment day 12. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn. The patterns are becoming more complex. It's not just clicks and pauses anymore. There are variations in intensity, subtle shifts in frequency. It's like a language, a complex, evolving dialect of the deep. I've been recording everything, every single exchange. My hands are shaking as I type this. It's getting closer. The sonar returns are stronger, the echoes more immediate. It's still below me, but the distance is shrinking. I can feel it. Not physically, not yet. But I feel its presence, a vast, unseen intelligence drawing nearer. The habitat itself feels different. The hum of the machinery seems louder, more strained. The subtle groans of the hull are more pronounced. Are they just the sounds of the deep, or are they vibrations? Vibrations from something immense moving through the water. I'm starting to question my own sanity. The isolation, the lack of sleep, the sheer absurdity of the situation. But then I play back the recordings, and the patterns are undeniable. It's real, and it's coming. The darkness outside the viewport feels less like an empty void, and more like a curtain, behind which something truly ancient and terrifying waits. Thorn, still here. Log entry 8. Project Cerberus, deployment day 13. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn. I'm not sure how much more of this I can take. It's right below me now. The sonar screen is a solid mass of red, indicating extreme proximity. The echoes are deafening, even through the habitat's sound dampening. It's not just sound anymore. I can feel it. A low, resonant thrumming, vibrating through the deck plates, through the very chair I'm sitting on. It's like the entire ocean is a drum, and this thing is striking it, sending ripples of pure energy through the water. My teeth are chattering not from cold, but from fear. Pure, unadulterated terror. What is it? What does it want? The patterns of its clicks, they're changing again. They're becoming faster, more insistent, almost agitated. I've tried to cease my own pings to see if it stops, but it doesn't. It continues relentlessly, sending out its strange, alien language into the dark. It feels like it's trying to break through, to communicate something vital, something urgent. Or perhaps something predatory. The thought makes my skin crawl. I'm trapped down here, a tiny speck of light and metal, surrounded by an intelligence beyond anything humanity has ever conceived. And it's right outside. Thorn. I need to figure this out. Log entry 9. Project Cerberus. Deployment day 14. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn. I haven't slept. Not a wink. The vibrations are constant now, a low, guttural hum that permeates everything. The habitat is shaking, not violently, but persistently, like it's being held by a massive, unseen hand, gently, but firmly. The sonar is useless now. It's just a solid wall of noise. But I can still hear the patterns. They're clearer now, even without the sonar. They're resonating through the hull. It's a series of clicks and pulses, but they're starting to sound familiar. My mind is trying to make sense of it, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. The claustrophobia is unbearable. Every wall, every panel, feels like it's closing in. The air is thick, heavy. I'm breathing shallow, ragged breaths. I keep peering out the viewport, even though there's nothing to see but the black. I'm half expecting to see a colossal eye staring back, or some grotesque limb pressing against the glass. But there's nothing. Only the darkness, and the vibrations, and the sound. The sound that is slowly, terrifyingly, resolving into something I recognize. Something I shouldn't. Thorn, still here. Still listening. Log entry 10. Project Cerberus. Deployment day 15. Depth 1,200 meters. Mark Thorn. It's a heartbeat. I can hear it now, clear as day. The sonar pings the vibrations against the hull. They're not just random patterns. They're forming a rhythm. A slow, steady, powerful beat, like a colossal heart thrumming in the depths. And it's getting stronger, faster. It's right here, right outside. I can feel the pressure building, not just the water pressure, but something else. Something internal. It's like the habitat is being squeezed, gently, but relentlessly. The lights are flickering. The emergency alarms are silent, but the internal diagnostics are screaming. Red lights everywhere. Power fluctuations. Life support, it's struggling. The air is getting thin. I'm trying to contact the surface, but there's no response. Just static. Just the heartbeat. It's so loud now. Thump thump. Thump thump. It's not just a sound. It's a feeling. It's in my chest. It's in my bones. It's everywhere. It's mimicking my own. No, it's not mimicking. It's becoming it. The pressure, the sound. It's forming a new pattern, anew. It's my own heartbeat. Oh God. It's its. Eighth story. The caller on the midnight shift. The red light above the studio door glowed. A silent sentinel in the vast, echoing silence of the late night. Leo adjusted his headphones. The familiar weighed a small comfort against the creeping chill that always seemed to seep into the old radio station after midnight. This was his domain, his sanctuary. The soundproofed booth of WZMB, 97.3 FM, nestled deep within the forgotten woods of Blackwood County. His show, Midnight Melodies, was a quiet affair, a curated blend of ambient tracks and forgotten classics, punctuated by the occasional listener call-in. Most nights, it was just him, the music, and the distant hum of the transmitter, a lonely beacon in the dark. Tonight, however, felt different. A subtle shift in the air, perhaps, or just the lingering fatigue from a long week. He cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone, his voice a practiced, soothing balm. Welcome back to Midnight Melodies, everyone. It's just past 2 o'clock here at WZMB, and we're easing you into the early hours with a little something from the archives. Up next, a classic that always seems to find its way into my rotation. He cued the track, watching the sound levels dance on the old analog board. The music drifted out, a gentle, melancholic piano piece. He leaned back, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. The station was a relic, a single-story brick building that had seen better decades. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the grimy window, overlooking a dense thicket of pines. It was isolated, miles from the nearest town, which was precisely why Leo loved it. No distractions, just the raw, unadulterated act of broadcasting into the void. The phone line blinked. Leo frowned. It was rare to get calls this late, especially after the initial rush of insomniacs and shift workers. He usually welcomed them, a brief connection to the outside world. He pressed the blinking button. WZMB, you're on the air with Leo. What can I do for you tonight? A voice, smooth as polished river stone, flowed through his headphones. It wasn't deep, nor was it high, but possessed a peculiar, almost hypnotic quality, like a lullaby whispered just beyond the edge of hearing. There was no static, no crackle, just pure, unadulterated sound. Good evening, Leo, the voice purred, a hint of something ancient and knowing in its cadence. Or should I say, Leo the lion? Leo froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. Excuse me, he managed, his voice suddenly thinner than he intended. Leo the lion was a childhood nickname, one his grandfather had given him. A name no one, absolutely no one, outside his immediate family had ever known. And his grandfather had been gone for years. Just a little something I picked up, the caller continued, utterly unperturbed by Leo's stunned silence. A fond memory, I imagine. A time when the world was simpler, less complicated. There was a soft, almost imperceptible chuckle, like dry leaves rustling. I don't have a song request tonight, Leo. I just wanted to talk. Is that all right? Leo swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He glanced at the blinking ON air light, a silent reminder that he was live. He couldn't just hang up, not without a reason. And what reason could he give? That a stranger knew his secret childhood name. Sure, he stammered, trying to regain his composure. What would you like to talk about? Life, perhaps, the caller mused, his voice weaving its way into Leo's ears, somehow both soothing and deeply unsettling. The small things, the hidden fears. For instance, Leo, do you still have that irrational dread of deep water? The kind where you can't see the bottom, where anything could be lurking beneath the surface. A cold knot tightened in Leo's stomach. The fear of bathyphobia. He'd never told anyone about it, not even his closest friends. It was a secret, a vulnerability he'd guarded fiercely since a childhood incident at a murky lake. How could this man possibly know? His hand trembled, almost spilling his coffee. I don't know what you're talking about," he lied, his voice barely a whisper. The caller chuckled again, that same dry, rustling sound. "Of course you don't. We all have our little secrets, don't we, Leo? Things we keep tucked away, even from ourselves. But sometimes, it's good to bring them into the light. Cleansing, in a way." There was a long pause, filled only by the gentle piano music playing in the background. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to say hello. And perhaps remind you of a few things. Good night, Leo." The line went dead. Leo stared at the phone, then at the on air light, his mind a chaotic swirl of disbelief and mounting dread. He fumbled with the controls, cutting to a commercial break a few seconds early. His hands were shaking. He pulled off his headphones, the sudden silence of the booth deafening. Who was that? How did he know those things? It wasn't a prank. The voice had been too calm, too knowing. It felt personal. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe an old schoolmate, someone who'd overheard a family conversation years ago. But the bathophobia, that was impossible. He spent the rest of the night in a haze of unease, jumping at every creak of the old building, every rustle of the wind outside. The comforting hum of the transmitter now sounded like a low, persistent growl. He finished his shift, packed up his things, and drove home through the pre-dawn gloom. The image of the caller's unnervingly calm face, a face he'd never seen, burned into his mind. The next night, Leo was a bundle of nerves. He kept glancing at the phone, half dreading, half expecting it to ring. He tried to convince himself it was a one-off, a bizarre coincidence. But the memory of the caller's voice, that smooth, hypnotic cadence, clung to him like a shroud. The phone line blinked again, just after 1 a.m. Leo's heart leaped into his throat. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the button. He could ignore it. But what if it was a genuine listener? He took a deep, shaky breath and pressed the button. "WZMB, you're on the air with Leo." "Good evening, Leo," the voice returned, as if no time had passed. This time, there was an almost imperceptible improvement in the audio quality. Less of the faint, distant hum that usually accompanied phone calls. It was clearer, crisper, as if the caller had moved from a landline to a cell phone with perfect reception. "Did you sleep well after our little chat?" Leo gripped the edge of the mixing board. "Look, who is this?" he demanded, trying to inject authority into his voice. But it came out as a desperate plea. "How do you know these things about me?" "Oh, Leo, such impatience," the caller chided gently, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Some things are simply known. They exist. Like the fact that you always leave exactly 3 ice cubes in your water glass, even when it's full. A peculiar habit, wouldn't you say?" Leo's eyes darted to the water glass on his console. 3 ice cubes, slowly melting. He had refilled it just before going on air. He felt a prickle of sweat on his forehead. "You're watching me," he whispered, the realization a cold, hard stone in his gut. "Watching, such a strong word," the voice purred. "Observing, perhaps. Appreciating the small details that make you, well, you. It's a fascinating study. And speaking of studies, do you recall that old, tattered copy of The Shadow over Innsmouth you keep in your glove compartment? The one with the dog-eared pages at chapter 7. Leo's jaw dropped. He had indeed been reading that book on his drive-in, leaving it, as always, in the glove compartment. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a prank. This was something else entirely. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fear. "Get away from me," he breathed, forgetting he was on air. Now, Leo," the caller's voice remained calm, almost paternal. "There's no need for such unpleasantness. We're just getting acquainted. Think of me as a very dedicated listener, one who appreciates your choice of music, your soothing voice, and your little quirks." Another soft chuckle. "I'll call again soon. Don't worry. Good night, Leo." The line clicked. Leo ripped off his headphones, throwing them onto the console. He scrambled to cut to another commercial, his hands shaking so violently he almost missed the button. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He pushed himself away from the console, stumbling back into the small, dimly lit control room. He peered out the grimy window into the impenetrable darkness of the woods. He saw nothing but the swaying silhouettes of trees, heard nothing but the distant chirping of crickets. But he felt it, a presence, a pair of unseen eyes watching him from the depths of the night. The station, once a haven, now felt like a glass box, transparent and utterly exposed. He spent the rest of the night packing, checking the single door, the two windows, again and again. He considered calling the police, but what would he say? "A man on the radio knows my ice cube habits and my childhood nickname." They'd laugh him out of the precinct. The dread became a constant companion over the next few nights. Leo started bringing a thermos of coffee from home, refusing to use the station's water cooler. He stopped reading in his car. He changed his routine, taking different routes to the station, arriving at unpredictable times. But it made no difference. The calls continued. Every night, around the same time, the phone would blink. And every night, the caller's voice grew clearer. It was no longer just a lack of static. It was as if the very air between them was thinning. One night, the caller's voice was so crisp, so immediate, that Leo swore he could hear the subtle intake of breath before each word, the faint whisper of air against the caller's lips. "You're looking tired, Leo," the voice said one night, its tone almost sympathetic. "Those dark circles beneath your eyes are quite pronounced. Did you forget to draw the blinds in your bedroom this morning? The sunrise can be quite harsh." Leo was on his feet, staring wildly around the booth. He lived 20 miles away. How could he know about his blinds? He felt a cold sweat break out on his back. "Where are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "What do you want?" "Oh, I'm close, Leo," the caller replied, a low hum now audible beneath his words, a sound Leo recognized as the distant drone of the highway, the one that ran just a few miles from the station. "Closer than you think. And what do I want? Perhaps just to be heard, to connect. Isn't that what you do, Leo? Connect with people through the airwaves." Leo pressed his face against the cold glass of the booth, trying to pierce the darkness outside. He saw nothing. He heard nothing but the caller's voice, now so immediate it felt as if he were speaking from the passenger seat of Leo's own car. He could almost feel the warmth of his breath. "You left your car keys on the passenger seat tonight, Leo," the caller continued, his voice a silken thread of dread. "Quite careless. anyone could just walk up and take them. Though, I suppose, no one else is out here, are they? Just you and me. Leo's blood ran cold. He had indeed left his keys on the passenger seat. He had been in such a hurry, so consumed by fear, that he'd forgotten. He felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just observation anymore. This was a direct, terrifying confirmation of proximity. The caller was here, or very, very close. He ended the call abruptly, cutting to music without a word. He didn't care about professionalism anymore. He just wanted the voice to stop. He spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of the booth, clutching a heavy microphone stand like a weapon. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps. The isolation, once a comfort, was now a suffocating terror. He was alone, miles from help, with an unseen presence closing in. The next night, Leo didn't even bother trying to act normal. He started his show, but his voice was strained, his eyes constantly darting to the phone. He had locked every door, every window, triple-checking them upon arrival. He had even propped a chair under the doorknob of the main entrance. A futile gesture, he knew, but it offered a sliver of false security. At 1:07 a.m., the phone blinked. Leo stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't want to answer. He wanted to run, but something compelled him, a morbid fascination mixed with a desperate need to understand. He picked up. "Good evening, Leo," the voice said, and this time, it was as if the caller was standing just outside the studio door. The audio was unnervingly perfect, devoid of any electronic interference. And beneath his words, Leo could hear it, the faint, rhythmic chirp of a cricket, the same cricket that had been singing just outside the studio window for the past hour. The sound was so clear, so present, it was impossible to deny. You're outside," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. He pressed his hand against the glass of the booth, as if he could feel the caller's presence through it. Indeed, the caller replied, his voice a soft caress, a chilling whisper in Leo's ear. "It's quite lovely out here tonight. The air is crisp. The stars are bright. And that old oak tree by the parking lot, it casts such a long, imposing shadow, doesn't it?" Leo's eyes snapped to the window. The ancient oak, its gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers, was indeed casting a long, distorted shadow across the gravel parking lot, illuminated faintly by the station's single, flickering security light. The caller was looking at the same tree, at the same shadow, right now. "What do you want?" Leo screamed, his voice cracking. He was no longer the suave DJ. He was just a terrified man trapped in a glass box. "What do I want, Leo?" the voice repeated, a hint of something akin to pity in its tone. "I want to be invited in, to share this space with you. It's so lonely out here, you see. And you seem so lonely in there." Leo scrambled back from the console, knocking his chair over. He could hear it now, faint but distinct, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the gravel outside. Then, a light tapping, rhythmic and insistent, against the studio window. Tap, tap, tap. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his hands over his ears. But the sound of the tapping, and the caller's voice, seemed to penetrate everything. "No, stay away," he yelled, tears stinging his eyes. "But Leo," the voice continued, unwavering, "we've been talking for so long. We've shared so much. Don't you feel it, this connection? It's only natural that I should come closer, to finally meet you face to face." The tapping intensified, becoming a frantic scratching, like fingernails dragging across glass. Leo could hear it even through the headphones, a horrifying counterpoint to the caller's calm voice. He could almost feel the vibrations through the floor. He opened his eyes, staring at the window, expecting to see a face, a monstrous visage. But there was nothing but the dark, the reflection of his own terrified face staring back. He ripped off his headphones, severing the connection. The scratching continued for a moment, then stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sounds. He stood there, trembling, listening. The hum of the transmitter, the distant chirping of the cricket, and then another sound, a faint click, the sound of the main entrance door, the one he had propped a chair under, slowly, deliberately opening. Leo's breath hitched. He hadn't heard footsteps. No creaking floorboards in the hallway. Just that soft, undeniable click. The sound of a latch disengaging. He backed away, pressing himself against the far wall of the booth, his eyes wide with terror. He could hear it now, the subtle shift in the air pressure, the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of air as the door swung inward. And then the voice returned, not through the phone, not through his headphones, but from the control room just outside his soundproofed booth. It was impossibly clear, resonating in the very air around him, a chilling echo of the voice he had heard for so many nights. "Hello, Leo," the voice purred, and this time it was accompanied by the soft, rhythmic cadence of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching the booth door. "I told you I was close. I told you I wanted to be invited in." Leo could hear the soft, almost reverent touch of a hand on the glass of the booth door. He could feel the warmth, the presence, just inches away. He could see the faint distortion in the glass as something pressed against it. And now the voice whispered, its tone filled with a profound, terrifying satisfaction. "We can truly talk, face to face. Don't you agree, Leo the Lion?" The broadcast cut out. The red light above the studio door flickered once, then died, plunging the booth into near total darkness. Only the faint, green glow of the mixing board's power light remained, a tiny, impotent beacon against the encroaching shadow. The only sound left was the slow, rhythmic creak of the booth door, gently, inexorably, opening. 9th story, the music box that forgot its tune. Arthur lived a quiet life, a solitary existence in a small apartment nestled in the heart of the city. His days were predictable, his evenings often spent in the gentle glow of a reading lamp. It was into this unassuming routine that the music box arrived, a curious and unexpected inheritance from a great aunt he barely remembered, a woman who had lived a life as distant and intricate as the mechanism within the wooden casing. The accompanying letter was brief, formal, and offered little insight beyond a simple instruction. "It brought me peace. May it bring you the same." The box itself was a marvel of craftsmanship. dark, polished rosewood, intricately inlaid with mother of pearl, depicting a swirling galaxy of stars and crescent moons. Its lid, when lifted, revealed a tiny, delicate ballerina poised on one leg, a miniature stage set behind her with painted velvet curtains. The mechanism gleamed, a series of brass cylinders and pins, gears and levers, all designed with an almost obsessive precision. When Arthur first wound it, the key turning with a satisfying, almost silken resistance, a melody emerged that was nothing short of ethereal. It was a lullaby, soft and flowing, with a gentle, undulating rhythm that seemed to cradle the air. Each note was perfectly pitched, a cascade of pure, unblemished sound. It spoke of forgotten childhoods, of quiet nights, of a deep and abiding tranquility. From that first night, the music box became an indispensable part of Arthur's evening ritual. He would finish his book, dim the lights, and then, with a reverence he hadn't known he possessed, wind the key until it clicked softly into place. The lullaby would fill the room, a soothing balm that smoothed away the day's anxieties, preparing his mind for the descent into sleep. He found himself looking forward to it, the familiar melody, a comforting anchor in the quiet expanse of his nights. It was a beautiful thing, a tangible piece of serenity, and he cherished it. Weeks turned into a month, then two, and the music box continued its nightly performance, unwavering in its gentle perfection. Then one evening, as the familiar notes began their ascent, Arthur felt a subtle tremor in the air, a microscopic ripple in the fabric of the sound. It was a single note, part of a descending arpeggio, that seemed to falter, to hesitate. It wasn't quite right. Not jarringly off-key, not overtly wrong, but subtly, almost imperceptibly, flat. He paused, his hand hovering over the winding key, listening intently. Had he imagined it? The melody continued, seemingly flawless, flowing into its gentle conclusion. He dismissed it, attributing it to tiredness, or perhaps a trick of the acoustics in his small room. It was, after all, an old mechanism. A slight imperfection was to be expected. The next night, the same note, in the same part of the melody, was undeniably flat. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible discord, like a single thread pulled taut in an otherwise perfect tapestry. Arthur frowned. He listened more closely, his ear straining to catch any other anomalies. But the rest of the lullaby remained as pure and calming as ever. He tried to tell himself it was charming, a unique characteristic of his particular music box, a sign of its age and history. Yet, a faint whisper of unease began to stir within him. The imperfection, however minor, was there. For the following days, the subtle decay accelerated. It wasn't sudden, not a catastrophic collapse of sound, but a slow, insidious corruption. Another note, then another, began to waver, to drift, to lose its true pitch. The once clear, bell-like tones now carried a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a hint of something sour beneath the surface. The lullaby, which had once been a seamless flow, now felt like a river whose currents were subtly shifting, creating tiny, unsettling eddies. Arthur found himself tensing as he listened, waiting for the next wrong note, his comfort slowly eroding into a strange, anxious anticipation. The beautiful melody was becoming bruised. He considered taking it to a specialist, someone who could restore such delicate mechanisms. But the thought felt wrong, almost sacrilegious. The changes were so subtle, so personal to the box itself. It was as if the music box was not merely malfunctioning, but was choosing to alter its song, to rewrite its own memory of the tune. The idea was absurd, of course, yet it persisted. Soon, the changes were no longer subtle. The flat notes became sharper, then wildly off-key. The gentle undulations of the lullaby twisted into discordant jags. What had once been a soothing harmony now grated on his ears, a series of clashing tones that seemed to fight against each other. The rhythm, too, began to warp, speeding up in some sections, dragging in others, creating an unsettling, lurching quality. The tiny ballerina on the stage seemed to spin with an almost frantic energy during these distorted passages, her delicate form a blur. The music was no longer a lullaby. It was something else entirely, something alien and unsettling, a melody that felt wrong in the deepest parts of his being. It was like listening to a familiar language spoken by a stranger, with all the right words, but the wrong intonation, the wrong meaning. The effect was not confined to the evenings. Arthur began to hear phantom notes during the day. A sudden, sharp clang, like a misplaced pin striking a brass cylinder, would echo in his ears while he was making coffee. A drawn-out, wavering tone, reminiscent of the music box's increasingly flat notes, would seem to emanate from the silence of his office. He would turn, expecting to find the source, only to be met with the mundane sounds of the city outside his window, or the quiet hum of his refrigerator. He knew, logically, that these were auditory hallucinations, a byproduct of his increasing obsession with the music box. But knowing did not make them any less real, any less disturbing. His dreams, once peaceful and often forgotten upon waking, became vivid and troubling. The clockwork figures inside the box, the ballerina, the painted curtains, would come alive. He would dream of the ballerina spinning wildly, her delicate limbs flailing, her painted smile stretched into a grimace as the discordant music shrieked around her. He saw the tiny gears grinding, not smoothly, but with a painful, shuddering motion, as if struggling against an unseen force. Sometimes, he would dream that the box was playing even when it wasn't wound, the distorted melody seeping into his subconscious, twisting his thoughts, reshaping the very architecture of his dreams. He would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom notes still ringing in his ears, the unsettling rhythm still pulsing in his veins. The insidious nature of the music box's corruption was its most terrifying aspect. It wasn't just the melody that was decaying. It was his perception of reality itself. The world around him seemed to subtly shift, to hum with the same unsettling dissonance that now emanated from the box. Colors seemed to shade off. Sounds acquired an unnatural resonance, and familiar objects appeared subtly distorted, as if viewed through a warped pane of glass. The gentle curves of his furniture seemed to twist. The straight lines of his walls appeared to bend. He would catch himself staring at a shadow, convinced it was moving with the erratic rhythm of the music box, only for it to remain stubbornly still. He tried to stop winding it. One night, he simply left the box closed, its lid a dark, polished mirror reflecting the dim light of his room. He lay in bed, desperate for silence, for the absence of the unsettling tune. But the phantom notes were louder that night, more insistent. They pulsed behind his eyes, echoed in the hollows of his skull. He heard the distorted lullaby not from the box, but from the very air around him, from the silence itself. It was as if the music had imprinted itself upon his mind, had become an internal soundtrack to his waking and sleeping hours. The absence of the physical music box only amplified the internal one. He couldn't escape it. The music box, even when silent, continued its work. He felt its influence like a cold, creeping fog, seeping into the corners of his mind. The once comforting ritual had become a torment, a nightly descent into a landscape of sound that was slowly, meticulously dismantling his sanity. He started to question everything. Was the world truly off-kilter? Or was it only his perception, warped by the ceaseless, discordant symphony? He found it harder to focus, his thoughts fragmented, constantly interrupted by the phantom notes. Conversations became difficult as he struggled to differentiate between what was real and what was merely a figment of the music box's insidious influence. One evening, as he lifted the lid, the music box seemed to hum with an almost malevolent energy. The ballerina, usually still until the winding began, appeared to twitch, a faint, almost imperceptible movement of her painted arm. He wound the key, his fingers trembling. The melody that emerged was no longer recognizable as a lullaby. It was a cacophony, a grating, screeching assault on his ears. Notes shrieked, clashed, and then dissolved into a guttural, grinding sound, like gears tearing themselves apart. The rhythm was a frantic, accelerating beat, a relentless pounding that mirrored the frantic beating of his own heart. He tried to close the lid, to silence the monstrosity, but his hand seemed to freeze, paralyzed by an unseen force. He watched, horrified, as the tiny ballerina began to spin faster and faster, her movements no longer delicate or graceful, but violent, a blur of white and pink. Her painted smile seemed to widen, to stretch impossibly, until it became a gaping maw. The painted curtains behind her rippled, as if a gale-force wind was blowing through the miniature stage. The music box was no longer a beautiful object. It was a living, breathing entity, consuming his reality, feeding on his sanity. The phantom notes no longer just echoed in his mind. They seemed to emanate from the very walls of his apartment. The furniture began to pulse with the distorted rhythm. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe and dance to the alien tune. He saw faces in the patterns of the wallpaper, heard whispers in the grinding of the gears. The world was no longer his own. It was being rewritten, note by discordant note, by the music box. He stumbled back, knocking over a lamp, the crash barely registering over the shriek of the music. He wanted to scream, to run, to smash the accursed thing into 1,000 pieces. But he couldn't move. He was trapped, held captive by the relentless, maddening melody. The music box had forgotten its tune. Yes, but in doing so, it had found a new one, a song of chaos and dissolution, and it was playing it directly into the core of his being. As the final, shattering notes of the corrupted lullaby died away, replaced by a chilling, resonant silence, Arthur looked at the music box. The lid was still open. The ballerina was still, but her painted smile seemed to hold a new, knowing quality. And in the depths of his own mind, the phantom notes began to play once more, no longer just echoes, but the very foundation of his new, terrifying reality. The music box had not only forgotten its tune, it had taught him a new one, and he would never be able to unlearn it. He was the instrument now, playing its endless, discordant symphony. 10th story, the static between the stars. Elias lived in the quiet hum of his own making, a world woven from copper wire, salvaged capacitors, and the boundless, echoing dark of the cosmos. His small, isolated cabin, nestled deep in the forgotten folds of the Appalachians, was less a home and more a shrine to the unseen, the unheard. Each night, as the sun dipped below the jagged silhouette of the mountains, he would descend into his sanctuary, a basement laboratory overflowing with homemade radio equipment. His quest was simple, yet profound: to listen, to sift through the universe's endless murmur, hopping to catch a whisper, a sigh, anything that wasn't just the cold, indifferent hiss of space. He was an amateur by any academic standard. No fancy grants, no institutional backing, just a man with an insatiable curiosity and hands calloused from years of tinkering. His telescope, a modest but powerful reflector, brought distant galaxies into blurry focus. But it was his custom-built radio array, a sprawling spiderweb of antennas reaching for the sky, that truly held his fascination. He spent countless hours hunched over his consoles, the glowing green lines of oscilloscopes dancing before his eyes, the air thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. Most nights were a symphony of white noise. The cosmic background radiation, the lingering echoes of the Big Bang, solar flares, distant quasars, all contributed to a chaotic roar that seemed to mock his solitary vigil. He logged everything, meticulous notes filling dozens of worn notebooks, detailing the subtle shifts, the fleeting anomalies. It was a lonely pursuit, the kind that slowly, imperceptibly, begins to erode the edges of one's sanity. The vastness he sought to understand pressed in on him, a constant, weighty presence that dwarfed his meager existence. He was a single, fragile consciousness, adrift in an ocean of unimaginable scale, searching for a single drop of meaning. Then came the quiet spot. It was a Tuesday night, the air outside still and thick with the promise of rain. Elias had been sweeping through the lower end of the ultra-high frequency band, a region he usually dismissed as too noisy, too prone to terrestrial interference. But something urged him to linger. And then he found it. Not a distinct signal, not a sudden burst of sound, but a subtle reduction in the pervasive static. A pocket of relative silence, a brief, almost imperceptible dip in the cosmic roar. His heart gave a curious lurch. He fine-tuned the dial, his fingers trembling slightly. Within that pocket of quiet, barely discernible beneath the surface of the remaining hiss, was a pulse, a rhythmic, almost hypnotic throb. It wasn't regular, not in a simple, predictable way. It had a complex pattern, a stuttering, halting cadence that spoke of deliberate construction rather than random cosmic chance. Elias sat motionless for a long time, listening, letting the strange rhythm imprint itself upon his mind. He recorded it, replayed it, ran it through every filter he possessed. The signal was weak, incredibly faint, like a whisper carried across light years of emptiness. But it was there, and it wasn't natural. The pulse became his obsession. Sleep became a luxury he could no longer afford. He worked with a feverish intensity, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands moving with an almost desperate urgency. He built new filters, refined old ones, sacrificing sleep and food for the relentless pursuit of clarity. The loneliness, which had always been a quiet companion, now intensified, morphing into a sharp, almost painful ache. He had stumbled upon something monumental, something that could redefine humanity's place in the universe. And there was no one to share it with, no one to bear witness to the profound, terrifying beauty of what he was uncovering. Days bled into nights. The pulse, slowly, painstakingly, began to reveal its true nature. It wasn't a sound, not in the traditional sense. It was a sequence, a repeating pattern of highs and lows, presence and absence. A binary code, the most fundamental language of information. He started transcribing it, filling countless pages with ones and zeros, his cramped handwriting mirroring the relentless stream of data. The sheer volume was staggering. He fed the raw binary into his old, clunky computer, a relic he had painstakingly rewired to handle the massive input. He wrote programs, debugging them with a fierce, unwavering concentration to convert the binary stream into visual data. He was gambling on the assumption that if this was a message, and if it originated from intelligence, then a universal language would be mathematics, and a universal medium, an image. The first attempts were garbled, nonsensical arrays of pixels, a kaleidoscope of digital noise. But he persevered, driven by an unshakable conviction that he was on the precipice of something extraordinary. He adjusted his algorithms, refined his error correction, slowly, painstakingly, chipping away at the static, revealing the hidden structure within. And then it began to emerge. A shape, a faint, almost ghost-like outline, coalescing from the digital chaos. It was spherical, with intricate internal structures. And as the signal was further refined, he realized it was a cell. Not just any cell, but a living cell depicted with astonishing detail. Its organelles, its nucleus, all rendered in crisp, precise binary. And then, as the message continued to unfold, the cell began to divide. It wasn't a rapid, fluid animation, but a sequence of distinct images, each frame showing a progressive stage of cellular mitosis. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air seeping into his basement. A cell dividing, a fundamental biological process rendered with such alien precision. What did it mean? Was it a greeting, a biological treatise, a warning about some cosmic pathogen? The possibilities spun through his mind, each more unsettling than the last. The sheer audacity of it, a message encoded in the fabric of the universe, waiting to be discovered by a lone listener. He worked tirelessly, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear and awe, until the last fragment of the signal was filtered, cleaned, and rendered. The final image resolved on his screen, stark and terrifying in its clarity. It was indeed a cell. But as he stared at the perfectly rendered schematic, the intricate internal structures, the undeniable truth slammed into him with the force of a cosmic impact. The cell wasn't biological. It was a celestial body, and the intricate internal structures were not organelles, but planets, each one rendered with chilling accuracy, orbiting a central, brilliant star. It was a perfect, unmistakable schematic of our solar system, and the division wasn't mitosis. It was a depiction of consumption. The subsequent frames, now perfectly clear, showed an unimaginable horror unfolding. A vast, dark, amorphous entity, impossibly large, impossibly ancient, closing in on the solar system. Tendrils of shadow, like cosmic amoebae, stretched out, engulfing planets one by one. First Mercury, then Venus, then Earth, consumed and assimilated, their bright lights extinguished, their perfect orbits disrupted. The division was the solar system being split apart, consumed not by an internal process, but by an external, unfathomable force. The message wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a biological treatise. It was a recording, a chilling, silent broadcast from a past, long-dead civilization. A snapshot of their final moments, sent across unimaginable distances, across eons of time. A desperate warning to any who might listen. Elias sat back, the faint hum of his equipment suddenly deafening in the silence of his lab. The image flickered on the screen, a silent testament to a cosmic horror that transcended human understanding. Our little corner of the universe, so vast and significant to us, was merely a diagram, a schematic presented as a universal truth. Everything has a predator. And we, along with our sun and our worlds, were simply on the celestial menu. The static returned, louder now, a mocking roar that seemed to fill the very core of his being. The quiet spot was gone, swallowed once more by the indifferent hiss of the universe. But the image remained, seared into his mind, an eternal monument to a truth so profound, so terrifying, that it left him utterly, irrevocably alone in the vast, echoing dark. He had listened, and the universe had answered. And the answer was death, on a scale that shattered the mind. Conclusion. And with that, our journey for tonight comes to an end. The last echo of the last story fades. For those of you still with me, still floating on the edge of sleep, I have one final question. Let me know in the comments which of tonight's narratives lingered with you the most. Which image or which fear has followed you into these quiet, final moments of the day. Until next time, sleep well.